Okay, so now we're at the point where all the side panels, bottom panels, and everything is pretty much glued up. What I went ahead and did was, on these pieces here, basically down the middle, where I glued up the two pieces, I went ahead and I just, I wanted to get a nice flat surface to start off machining my pieces. So basically, I went ahead and just sanded those joints down to, not a finished smooth, but just about there. That way I have a nice smooth piece to work with when I start machining them. So I went ahead, I did all that, and basically we got all our sides and everything all basically smoothed down and to the point where you can't even see the joints. So it's came out really good. The glue up actually was came out very nice, because I mean sometimes with glue ups you get pieces that are just like I said, they're really didn't glue up well. But being that we use the biscuits, that helps a lot, because that really helps keep the pieces in line to where when they do come together like that, you will have to do some sanding or some machining, but in this case we had to do very minimal because those biscuits kept the joints pretty much together where they needed to be. So, but I got that step all set, and basically right now we're ready to start machining the pieces down to size. Okay, so basically we're all set up. At this point, we're going to rip the side panels and the back panel and the front panel to 18 inches in width, or I'm sorry, in height. So basically, I got the table saw all set up to rip 18 inches. So we're going to run those four pieces through, and then we'll go on to the next cut. Okay, so now what we're going to do is cut our back panel and our front panel down to length. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use the circular saw, just because my chop saw obviously is not long enough to make a straight cut all the way through. I can use the table saw, but in order to use the table saw, I would need a rip sled, which I don't have right now. That's going to be a project that we are going to do in the future. We're going to make a rip sled for the table saw. That way we can cut bigger pieces like this on the table saw with no problems, because obviously the fence only goes to about 2 feet in width. So, and being that this is going to be about 40 inches, obviously it's much too big to do that. Plus, you don't always want to be ripping pieces like that against your fence and stuff, because it really creates kickback and all that kind of stuff. So in order to do it safely on the table saw, I would like a cross-cut sled, which unfortunately we don't have right now, but we will be building one in a future project. So what I'm going to do right now to just cut these down to length is basically, like I said, I measured to 40 inches because that's where I want my cut to be. Now with using my circular saw, you have to take into consideration the distance from here to the blade, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a straight edge on my piece that my saw will run along to cut my nice straight line, and actually it will give me a pretty good straight line, nice and square. But in order to do that, I have to offset my straight edge the same distance as on my saw to my blade. That way when I cut it, the blade actually cuts the line that I want it to cut. So in this case, on this saw here, it's 1 inch from the edge of the base to the blade. So basically what I did was, is I took this, I made my mark at 40 inches, I came back to 39 for the 1 inch, and that's where I'll clamp down my straight edge, I'll run my piece through, and my piece will be to the size that I want it to. So I'm just going to go ahead, I made 2 marks on my piece here. That way, from that edge I made 2 marks, that way I know that that piece is directly in line. And I'm just going to grab a couple clamps. All good. Now I know there's a lot of different ways to make this kind of cut. This is the one way that I said that I was going to do it. And even doing it in this way, there's also multiple tools to make this cut. They've got different saws out there. They've got track saws and all that kind of stuff, which are great machines that'll make this kind of cut. But if you could see that I'm actually using a framing square, and it actually works out because typically sometimes, because again, another way you can make this cut is you could just use a regular straight edge, but in order to do so, it's just straight this way, and you usually put a clamp here and you put a clamp here. But then sometimes when you're running your saw through, the clamps, if you're not cautious of where you place your clamps, they could get in the way of you making your cut. So then you're halfway through your cut and you're noticing that your saw might hit your clamps or something like that. The reason why I like using framing square is that you've got the nice long edge here that I could put across my pieces, but then I've got this edge here that's also long that I could use to clamp down the straight edge itself. So now my clamps are completely out of the way of the saw, and this is pretty solid in place. I mean, I'm not going to really be roughhousing with it to jockey it around. So it actually works out pretty nice. So in this way here, my clamps are out of my way and there's no problems. So I've got it all clamped in. Let's go ahead and make that cut. One thing too that you want to make sure when you're doing this is that the blade depth on your saw is set at a certain height. Because obviously I'm doing this on a tabletop, so I don't want the saw to cut through the top of the tabletop. So we're just going to set that just a little bit below the thickness of the piece. Clamp it in place and we are ready to go. There we go. We got a nice straight edge, nice and clean, and that piece is all cut to size. We're going to duplicate it for the back panel now, and then we will work on the size of the bottom of the box. Basically what we're going to do next is I got my stacked dado head set up into the table saw. We're going to take all four sides of our box and we're going to run them through to create a 3/4 inch dado at the bottom of the box. So let's grab our pieces and start running them through. Okay, and let's see how we did. That is a nice, snug fit. It's a perfect dado. No slop in it. You want it to be a little bit snug in there, just so when you glue it up, it's not flopping all over the place. But otherwise, a good dado. Okay, now that we got all our dados ripped in our side panels, what we're going to do now is cut down our bottom panel to our box down to its size. And basically the size of that, what it's going to be 17 3/4 inch in width and 40 3/4 in length. I've already got our table saw set up for 17 3/4, so we're going to go ahead and rip this to width, and then we will cut it to length. let's go ahead and cut it to length. What we're going to do is, basically what we're going to do on this project here is we're going to just screw the sides together. Now I know some of you might be thinking that that's not, you know, a real traditional joint, which obviously it isn't. It's just screws. But in this case, and I could have went with like doing like a half rabbet and stuff like that to kind of give it that more traditional joint. But just for a sure speed on the project and stuff like that, I'm going to screw all the corners together. And the reason why I'm going to do that too is just because after the box is put together, for some detail trim work that I'm going to do along all four corners, I'm going to put like these little thin strips of maybe some decorative cutouts or something like that, just to kind of dress up the corners and things of that nature. So really those screws are going to be hidden anyways, so nobody's really going to see them. So it's kind of just a, you know, quick and dirty way of connecting the box all together without getting too crazy with the joinery. So basically what we're going to do is just drill in 3 different holes on both sides of the 2 shorter end panels, because then those are going to get fastened to the longer panels. So I'm going to place 3 holes. We'll drill those out. We'll countersink the screws, that way they are just a little bit below the surface. That way when I do put those trim pieces on, they sit nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and mark those out and we'll get those drilled in. I'm basically going to come in 3/8 of an inch because I'm dealing with 3/4 inch material. So we want to go at least half of what the material is. Get it right in the center. So we got 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So we'll drill those right there. Now on this here, being that you know, this part here doesn't really need to, the screw doesn't really need to catch into this one, it needs to catch into the larger panel. I'm going with a larger drill bit than what the screw threads are. That way the screw will kind of in a sense pass right through this piece but grab the other piece, and that helps just for preventing for splitting and that sort of thing. Okay, so basically we got all our holes drilled in our 2 side panels. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fasten it to the longer back and front panels. And basically how I got this set up here is I got just a couple clamps just holding the longer panel in place. Using a flat surface really helps, because being that this is clamped to that flat surface, now when I go ahead and put this one up along it to go ahead and to screw those screws in, I'll know that the edge of this one is perfectly flush and flat with the outside edge of the front panel. So you know, basically that'll be what it is. I'm going to dump a couple screws in there and fasten it together. Now before I do that, I'm just going to take a little bit of our wood glue, okay, and we're just going to put it on this joint here a little bit. You know, even though the screws are doing the majority of the work, it can't hurt to throw a little glue on that, on all your joints. Always remember that. So I'm going to take this, line that up. Basically I'm more concerned about up here. Down here is the bottom of the box, up here is the top, so I'm more concerned about that being perfectly flush. If the bottom happens to be off just a little bit, which on this case it isn't, I'd rather have it to be at the bottom. We're just going to take our screws, kind of start them in place here, and fasten those right in. perfectly countersunk, and everything is good. And then once we get the next couple pieces on, then we'll start squaring it up just to make sure that it is all squared. Okay, so now basically we got our two sides screwed onto our front panel. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our bottom panel, slide it into the dados, and get it all kind of squared up before we go ahead and put the back panel on. Now this bottom panel should actually act as a little bit of a square, because basically we cut the panel square, which then in return would make our piece square. Let me just grab my mallet and we'll get this thing in. Now it is a little bit snug, like I was talking about, which is good, because like I said, I'd rather have it a little snug than a little bit loose. So just go ahead and work it in, work it down, a little bit at a time. If you find that it is getting a little trickier to push in, grab a block and just do it with that. And that way there you're not damaging the edge of your wood. Okay, we're just about there, so we're going to now start lining that edge up. All the way in on all my joints. We're just going to tap those sides in a little bit. Like so. And that's actually not a bad fit. So now we'll go ahead and we'll put the other half on and we'll get that screwed in as well.